Welcome to the Provincial Office webinar with a special welcome to those who are joining us for the first time. I hope you're all safe and well. My name is Andrew Rydell and I'm the Provincial Deputy Grand Secretary. For the past few weeks, if there's been a question that I or any of our guest speakers, including Sir David Wootton, have been able to answer fully, we've suggested it would be an excellent question to ask the Grand Secretary. Well, today is the day. It's my great pleasure, somewhat my relief, to introduce David Staples. David was appointed Chief Executive of UGLE in 2017 and invested as Grand Secretary in 2018. David has been at the forefront of transforming the organisation for the modern age, not only in terms of its operation, but also how it communicates with the outside world. David, welcome to West Lancashire. It's very good of you to be here today. First of all, how are you? And what have you been up to for the last 4 months?
Very well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. The last 4 months, I think nobody really could have predicted what was going on. Ordinarily, we are getting the investitures in April out of the way, and then the season winds down, and we all look forward to a good few weeks off in August, and then start things going again for September and the new season. And of course, actually what has happened is that we have been trying to predict and anticipate and plan for what has been unprecedented times. Nobody really knew quite the direction that things were going to take, whether the government was going to continue lockdown in a very strict manner, or whether it has chosen the path that it has done and is actually relaxing reasonably quickly. And so we've had to do quite a bit of scenario planning, both financial and to do with membership organisation, and of course to do with Freemasons Hall, which sits under my remit, to ensure that whatever was coming we were prepared for, and that our responses were proportionate and sensible and safe. And we won't have got everything right, but I think as things evolve over the next few weeks or so, we try very hard to ensure that we continue to be both proactive and reactive in interpreting the guidance, the law, and what our members want, and synthesising that into some sort of sensible midway position.
Good. Well, it sounds as though you've had quite a lot on your plate. Is there quite a lot of noise at your end? It's some background noise.
There may be a little bit of background noise. I suspect that will disappear reasonably soon. There's just a couple of. I'm actually in the business centre at the moment of my club in London, I suspect that will stop imminently.
Lovely. Okay, thank you for that. Perhaps it would be useful just to run through your portfolio, the kind of things you mentioned. Responsible for Freemasons Hall, but if you could chat about your portfolio and what the impact that the current situation has had on the different areas of that.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, my job as Chief Executive really falls into two main areas. Firstly, to run the administration of Freemasonry, and in particular to bring up to date what essentially is a 100-year-old paper-based membership organisation in terms of how it keeps in touch with its members, how it knows who its members are, and how the sorts of things that lodge secretaries up and down the country will have been contending with for a number of decades. Our systems are very, very thorough, and they work very, very well, but they are designed for a time when telephones didn't exist, when the postal service was the only way of really communicating with people. And obviously there's been updates to that over the 20th century, but it's really been updating processes which were designed 2 centuries ago. And so my job is to really ensure that the administration works in a way which is fit for the 21st century. And that doesn't involve simply updating ancient processes and putting a computer somewhere in there. It's about redesigning those processes and making sure that they make everybody's lives easier, from our candidate members, to our lodge secretaries, to our provinces, and indeed to UGLE itself. That's the first major portfolio that sits under me. The second one really is about communicating what Freemasonry is and who we are to the general public. For a number of decades, we have been private about what we do and how we do it. And as the world moves towards valuing transparency and valuing understanding of what organizations are, what their purpose is, what they stand for, an organization that simply says, actually, we're private, mind your own business, plummets in their expectations. And our detractors are all too quick to fill the voids in information we give with fanciful conspiracy theories and fanciful inventions about what Freemasons are and what they get up to in their meetings and what they do. So my second portfolio really is to assist the public to understand what Freemasonry is, who we are, what we do, why we do it, and how. And then the third main area, I suppose, comes under the role of Grand Secretary, and that is the ceremonial aspects of the job, the installation of provincial and district rulers, and the things which you would recognise as being the more Masonic elements of my role.
So there's obviously been a lot of change over the past few months, but in particular over the last few weeks. Where do you see the organisation in, a couple of years' time after the things that we've seen going on for the past few months? I know that's a really difficult question to answer, but throw it out there and get it out of the way first, I suppose.
I think COVID, as in so many things, has disrupted the way that we have done things. And in a way, an element of that is to be entirely regretted, because we're not simply able to go back to how we used to do things and how we all enjoyed doing things, but it also presents a large opportunity. The way in which we have been recognised for our charitable contributions, our contributions to society at large and to the communities that we're drawn from, has been enormous over the last 3 months or so. And our ability to come together, not just as individual provinces doing our own thing, but as an organisation, a national organisation, which donates £48 million to charity each year, which contributes 18.5 million hours of unpaid voluntary service each year, has helped us enormously in the public perception of who we are and what we do. We have donated 380 tonnes of food to food banks. We have procured and produced and delivered over 300,000 meals for the vulnerable. We have donated over 1,000 tablets to hospitals and to care homes to enable people to keep in touch with their relatives at times when they weren't able to visit. And all of this has come to the notice of a public where 40% knew that Freemasonry existed but had absolutely no idea what we stood for or what we did. And so it has, as well as all of the obvious bad life-changing things that have come about, it has enabled us to seize an opportunity to talk about ourselves in a different way, and in a way which has absolutely had our traditional detractors stop in their tracks, take a step back and reevaluate the position that they had on us. And so what I would like to see in 18 months, 2 years' time is a continuation of that, a continuation of us being much more open about who we are and what we do, to be comfortable about talking in very broad brush terms about what happens during our meetings, not spoiling it for potential candidates, not going into any great detail, but simply able to say that there are ceremonies, what some of those ceremonies stand for, and the other business aspects that happen within our meetings, and therefore reducing the amount of opportunity that those who would come up with fanciful stories about us have to fill the gaps. I think the direction is set on that. The board and the rulers are very happy with that direction, and I think it's important for us as an organisation to be comfortable in that.
Thank you. Getting a few questions on this, and I know this is something we talked about earlier, where people were surprised to some extent in terms of how soon the suspension had been lifted and how meetings were going to be allowed to go ahead, probably sooner than most people expected, and certainly a lot of people felt comfortable doing. In our province, we have a few halls which aren't going to be able to be open to facilitate meetings until later on in the year, and they can get COVID secure, to use the new parlance. We also have a lot of lodges where the brethren simply have expressed a wish that they're not going to come out until there's a vaccine or they feel secure going out. How would you address those concerns and some of the processes around it?
I would say firstly that when we introduced the suspension, we introduced a 4-month suspension of Freemasonry. And so I think it's fair to say that although people may have been expecting us to increase the length of that, it's been known for 4 months that was going to be the period of suspension. Secondly, as a doctor, I would say that now it is the safest that it has been in the last 4 months to go and do things, because the incidence within the population is so extraordinarily low. Now, whether that's the case in 2, 3, 4, 5 months' time, is a different question. But if people are worried about going out now and think it's going to be safer in 4 or 5 or 6 months' time, I would suggest that they reevaluate that. It is safe now, or as safe as it's going to be, and who knows what it's going to be in 4 or 5 months' time. Thirdly, it's really important that we that people realise is what we are doing is giving lodges and chapters the choice as to what they wish to do. And I think it's a really important point that people understand that Freemasonry isn't entirely homogenous. There are lodges of young, low-risk people. There are lodges of mixed young and old. There are lodges of old and vulnerable, and there's everything in between. And so to base UGLE policy on one particular lodge's or even one particular province's sort of circumstances and then extend that across the entirety of the craft would be wholly wrong. There are people within London certainly that are entirely happy to meet, that consider it entirely safe to meet, and are probably entirely correct to do so. And so those lodges, as their choice, will wish to do so, will continue their Freemasonry, and lodges equally which have older members, more vulnerable members, may choose that either the lodge doesn't wish to meet, or indeed that a section of that lodge may not be able to come. I also think it's important to realise that a lodge isn't run purely by the older, or indeed those with the most strident opinion, or indeed those with the loudest voice. The lodge is there for all of its members. And so I would say allow the lodges to make their own choices as to whether they wish to meet, they feel comfortable meeting, and whether they are able to meet at this time. And if they're not, that's fine. They won't hold their meetings. But across the craft in general, there is a huge desire to get back to as close to business as usual as we can, or indeed the new normal, and that UGLE has a responsibility to facilitate that if it sits within the national framework of the government guidance and indeed the local guidance of the halls. And so it does worry me when I hear that individual halls are saying, we're not going to open. We're not opening until 2021. Freemasons Hall is making itself open, available and safe, and will be there for any lodges which normally meet there, and probably a few that want to meet there that don't usually meet there. Now, there will be some halls that, because of their size or because of their particular layout, that they are simply not able to open. And I have every sympathy for those halls, but the halls exist for the benefit of the lodges that meet there, and often those lodges are major shareholders within them. And so I would say that if they're simply choosing not to open because they don't fancy it, then I would not be overly supportive of that.
Okay, obviously the announcement that came out last week effectively prohibited festive boards. Obviously, we've got a couple of months between now and, well, at least kind of 6-7 weeks between now and September, when a lot of lodges will be due to start again. Will the advice around festive boards, or the notice about festive boards, be updated before then? Will it depend on government advice, or how do you see that developing?
So there is always a difference between guidance and the law, and I have to be mindful of the reputational impact on Freemasonry if lodges or halls are ignoring guidance, and then that comes to the attention of the press, and is used as a way as a stick to beat us with. It is absolutely clear that no more than 2 household bubbles can go out to eat together at the moment. And so what Freemasons choose to do after their lodge meeting, if they wish to go and eat in small groups that meet that particular government guidance, is a matter for them as private individuals, and UGLE has no power or inclination to tell them what they can and cannot do. However, if a lodge goes and meets as a lodge of, say, 30 individuals at a festive board, then that is very clearly both contrary to the guidance and illegal at the moment. And of course, this isn't just me reading the odd thing that comes out from the government and making the decisions myself. This is the very clear advice from both my legal department and indeed the Grand Registrar, who is a retired High Court judge. And I've read his opinions, and it is on that basis that the guidance that we issue is issued. Now, there will be a number of hall managers, there's a number of pub managers indeed, who take a different view on that, and that is indeed entirely up to them. But as the chief executive, it's my job to ensure that I listen to the right interpretation, and that what comes out from me and what comes out from UGLE is based on that. The earliest possible opportunity when that guidance changes, then our advice to halls and Freemasons will also change, because we recognise that actually perhaps certainly at meetings, an initiation meeting without a festive board afterwards may not be the best way of introducing candidates to Freemasonry. But unfortunately our hands are tied by the government guidance, which is very clear on this at the moment.
So presumably the same applies to, for example, face masks. We've seen today that face masks are obviously going to be compulsory in shops from, I think, the 24th. If the guidance is that in public or public areas, face masks should be worn, the same applies to Freemasons.
Yes, I mean, I think there's a little bit more leeway on this, because the guidance, as you say, is very clear that it is just in shops. My personal take on that is that unless anybody has vehement objections, we should be wearing face masks in meetings.
Okay. That's quite clear then. Does that come from a feel as a doctor, or is that a I know that's quite a personal question, but is that informed as from your medical background?
Yes, I mean, it's my reading of the evidence, which changes, and it changes rapidly. There is no, I think it's fair to say, there is no subject in science that has ever been so well funded or as rapidly researched as coronavirus, because of the effect that it is having globally. And I think it's entirely clear that wearing masks protects people from people who may have it and not realise that they don't have it. And so you're not wearing the mask for yourself, you're wearing the mask for other people who you may infect if you don't know you've got it. And again, it's very, very clear that you can have it for 2 days and be infectious and have absolutely no symptoms whatsoever.
And presumably along with that kind of guidance goes the wash your hands regularly, avoid touching your face and eyes and all that.
And drink plenty of gin.
Oh, right, okay.
Won't
Can we have that in writing, please?
Won't protect you from coronavirus, but if you're going to cark it, at least you go with a smile on your face.
There's a couple of questions about the kind of process of abandoning meetings, and we had a conversation about this earlier. We've been quite clear in as much as a summons must be issued for a meeting. If the lodge's bylaws state that they should have a meeting, a summons must be issued for that. However, we had an interesting conversation earlier about the abandonment of the meeting. Go on.
So we will be clarifying this on Friday, but it is clearly daft to expect people to either come to a place and then decide they haven't got enough people to hold the meeting because they're not quorate. It's also clearly daft to expect people to reply on the day of the meeting and make that decision at that point. And so guidance that we have issued in March was that secretaries should be encouraged to do a poll of who is likely to come, who is not likely to come, and if the meeting is not quorate from that poll, then it can be abandoned at that stage. And secretaries are well within their rights to say, please reply by 3 or 4 days before the meeting, and at that point decide whether the meeting is viable or not.
I'm sure you've just made a lot of secretaries very happy that they either don't have to have had questions, do I have to drive to the Masonic Hall and sit outside there and wait? And likewise for some of the halls which are opening perhaps a little later, secretaries saying, do I have to apply for a dispensation to move the meeting to a place when we're not going to have the meeting anyway? Have the meeting anyway.
So I think if your poll suggests that you're not going to have the meeting because it wouldn't be quorate or none of your members wish to come to that meeting at this stage, then no, it would be daft to apply for a dispensation in order not to hold a meeting somewhere. So you don't need to do
that. And obviously, if you follow that process as we've just discussed, that doesn't affect the lodge's continuity of working. It will be, it's not going to be, it is not the same as cancelling a meeting if you have issued the summons for the meeting.
No, that's right. I think there is good precedent going back both to the 1918 flu pandemic and indeed the Crimean War and various other things that due to extraordinary circumstances when a meeting has to be abandoned, that does not affect your right to a centenary or a bicentenary warrant. You have to have not held meetings for a year in order to demonstrate an interruption in continuous working. And so most lodges will be able to hold one meeting within that year's period.
Okay. Got a question from Andrew Thompson. Does the decision of UGLE to end the suspension not just puts the responsibility on the lodges and halls, it means that track and trace, etc., falls on the lodge, along with the responsibility if an outbreak did take place from a meeting?
I think it's inevitable that at some point an outbreak will take place from a meeting or from a hall because we're in the middle of a pandemic. But I think people need to have a sensible view of risk and liability as a result of this. People, as long as they're acting within government guidance, are entitled to get on with their everyday lives. Secretaries keep sheets of attendance of who attends. Halls may well, as part of their COVID secure measures, wish to keep sheets of who is in the building at any given time. And as long as sensible and easy to accomplish actions like that are taken, in terms of track and trace, this won't be up to a lodge secretary to do. This will be up to the government and their processes for tracking and tracing. So the government will be in touch with somebody, information will be passed on, and then it will be them who contact the people that need to be contacted, and the advice given that they should self-isolate. So whilst if you go anywhere, you have to abide by slightly stricter rules in terms of knowing who is in that particular building. It is an issue for the hall managers to ensure that they can do that. We do it anyway as lodges and chapters, and it's just a case of being sure that that information can be made available if it needs to be made available.
How are local lockdowns going to be managed? Are you generally going to issue kind of local suspensions as well, or would you just expect lodges within those areas to shut down?
No, I think in the guidance that we've issued in conjunction with Mark Mason's Hall, either point 2 or point 3 is that national and regional government instructions must be complied with. And so a local lockdown is a national government edict, which imparts certain restrictions to at present Leicestershire, for example, and Leicester. And so there is already a sort of a standing order that those restrictions should be adhered to.
Okay. Got just a couple again, just process questions from Austin Fletcher, just asking the conditions of quorum. Austin, we've talked about this a number of times. The quorum for the lodge is 5 masons plus a tiler or a janitor, and one of which needs to be a past master. Only 2 of those need to be members of the lodge. So actually you can open a lodge with only 2 members of that lodge present. So if it's something that if there's a particular bit of business that you need to get done, which may be, for example, something to do with voting for honorary membership, or perhaps electing the master, if your installation's in January, for example, and you don't meet in December, your election meeting is in November, but people feel nervous about meeting in November. Actually, what you can do is just get 5 people plus a tiler to come, and they don't necessarily need to be members of the lodge. If you've got a new and young Masons club in your area, you can ask 3 of them to pop along, and the lower risk brethren, the lodge can be simply opened quickly. You can elect the master for the ensuing year, and then you can close the lodge and go and have a nice socially distanced drink. The advantage of that being it's 6 people, and with pubs at the moment, you can have 6 people outside from different households. So at happy days, that works quite well. If you need any more questions about that, about quorum and things like that, by all means, you can ask me at the provincial office. But it's an interesting thing, the quorum, isn't it? Just I'm fascinated to know, and this isn't a question that I necessarily expect you to know. I think it's more a Graham Redman question. But how those quorum rules came about? Just do you have any idea? I mean, but only 2 members of a lodge need to be present, it seems.
I think I think they date right back to Anderson's constitutions of 1723. So at that point, it was decided that that was the number of people required in order to hold a meeting. That's my understanding. I'm sure Graham would either tear me to pieces or give me a sage nod that I'd finally got something right. But that would be that would be where I think it comes from.
I've got a question from the provincial membership officer. We've had quite a few enquiries actually for membership during the period. In fact, probably more in the equivalent period to this time last year. But Neil Ward is just asking what's UGLE's thinking on keeping the interest of many of these people that won't necessarily be able to be initiated as quickly as they would have otherwise been following an application.
I mean, I think it's worth just expanding and saying that in the last 4 months, there's a number of provinces who've had enormous interest in joining Freemasonry as a result of the very positive press coverage that we've been getting. Buckinghamshire has a waiting list of 130 completed Form Ps, and what a lovely problem to have. Relying on the intrinsic enthusiasm of Generation X and millennials to stay engaged and stay keen on doing one thing over 4, 5, 6 months is fraught with difficulty. And it would be a lie to say that this did not inform our decision to come up with a way of doing socially distanced initiation ceremonies. We think it is important that both for you as members who enjoy going to meetings and seeing ceremonies, as well as for ensuring that the people who are on those waiting lists don't have to wait too long, that we are able to bring people in, even if it is a less than perfect way, and it's a way that some of us think is a dilution of how a ceremony of initiation should be. That having been said, our judgment is that if a lodge wishes to bring people in, there should be a way for them to do so, especially as we don't understand quite how long this may last yet, and it may last some very considerable time. So by bringing people in and altering our own internal processes that we have control over, that's one way that we can engage some of these people. I know that Buckinghamshire, again, because it's got such a large waiting list, is doing an awful lot on Zoom, is doing what it can in quiz nights, pub nights, family nights, all sorts of things which bring people together virtually in the same way that a number of lodges are actually doing, and inviting these candidates to join social events at distance over the internet with some of the lodges that they may be joining. Is it perfect? No, not at all. Are there other things that we would be doing during normal times? Yes. Other things which they're doing are tying them into provincial newsletters, to tying them into First Rising, so that they actually see a little bit of what the wider organisation is that they're joining. And of course, ensuring that their proposer, their secondary, and the lodge mentor, ringing them up every now and then, and ensuring that they're okay and that they're still interested. So I think there are a number of measures that we can do to engage prospective candidates, and the vast majority of those, of course, also apply to people who are in lodges now. It's been interesting for me to reconnect to some people that I haven't seen for 5 or 6 years at some of the lodges that I attend, who actually find it easier to log on to Zoom and rekindle some of those friendships that perhaps had started to wane a little bit. And it's been really nice to touch base again with some of those people. So I think technology and this happening now has changed the organisation in a way which I don't think will disappear when things come back to normal. I think we will always be having more Zoom meetings than we previously had, and I think that's probably for the best.
I certainly concur with that. We've had people on our lodge Zoom meetings who we haven't seen in the lodge for 2 years, and who've joined the meetings and have thoroughly enjoyed it, and actually resolved when they can come back to come back. So I think the engagement that we've been able to have with the members, both active and less active, has actually been really, really good, and it's something really positive that's come out of the pandemic, as you say. Just want to go back to the altered ceremonies. Do you see those as suggestions for the ceremony, or are they compulsory? Would you recommend that if you don't follow the guidelines that have been sent out, you don't do the ceremony? Or if you can think of another way of doing it, try it that way?
UGLE's position is that if you wish to do the ceremonies of initiation and passing, that those suggestions are how you should do it. And so the element of choice is whether your lodge wishes to do those ceremonies in that particular way, or whether it wishes to defer until such time in the future as it can do the ceremonies in the traditional way. The suggestions are very much temporary in addition to the armoury for the period that COVID restrictions are in place. These are not the thin end of the wedge or trying to get something in that we are then going to continue to do and that will become the new normal. These are a response to the times that we find ourselves in at the moment. And as soon as this all settles down, we will go back to doing things in the traditional way that we always have. But UGLE's position is that in order to make the ceremonies safe for our members, this is the way that they should be done. We have got involved because what we didn't want is everybody coming up with different ways of doing everything. And so it's not UGLE that is the authority on these. It was the committee of the Emulation Lodge of Improvement, which has, if you like, the constitutional control of the emulation ceremony, and by extension, the other ceremonies, which are the other rituals which are worked. But no, UGLE would like these adhered to simply for safety and to ensure that people are doing things in a way which exposes them to the least risk possible.
Speaking about the least risk possible, a couple of questions have just come in about this. Obviously, Mark and some of the other orders have resolved to allow business meetings to be conducted by Zoom, but UGLE hasn't.
Yeah.
Is that purely a matter of the Constitution is the Constitution is the Constitution, or what's the reason?
Yeah, I mean, we are bound by our Book of Constitutions, and we are also bound by the fact that it takes at least 6 months to change any of our rules. And that's a very sensible provision most of the time, because it means we can't do things in a hurry because somebody thinks it's a good idea. It imparts a constitutional pause during which things can be thought about, and we can decide whether we really want to do something or whether we really think that's a good idea. And that has evolved over 3 centuries as a way of ensuring that bright young things with good ideas don't accidentally bugger up the entirety of Freemasonry. Now, what of course has come out of that is that the Book of Constitutions never envisaged a situation where we might need to do things quickly out of necessity. And it's clear that a number of the provisions in there are less than ideal for the circumstances that we currently find ourselves in. And we will be looking at changing some of the rules to enable us to do the sorts of things that we might want to do. But again, the Grand Registrar's opinion in terms of virtual meetings or virtual business meetings is that it is one of the ancient landmarks of Freemasonry that a lodge meeting consists of a physical meeting within a properly tiled lodge room. And so whilst we have made the proviso that lodge meeting may be called off, and that members who cannot physically attend the lodge may then be zoomed in virtually in order to discuss elements of business, that the vote will happen in the called on lodge, having regard to the conversation that has happened previously. I'm aware that Master Masons are able to sort of have virtual business meetings, but that is not something that's currently permissible under UGLE rules.
Just picking up on something you said in terms of the lessons that have been learned from this and the necessity to perhaps be able to react a little more quickly than are currently possible. What are some of those lessons? What kind of constitutional changes can you see kind of 12, 18 months down the line as a result of the situation we're in now?
Well, I think it would be useful to recognise that some situations may arise where emergency legislation is required. Even the Grand Master is bound in his powers by what the Book of Constitutions say he can and cannot do. So it's not a case that the Grand Master can just decree anything that he likes. And again, the Grand Registrar's opinion is that whilst we can do those things in an emergency which are required in order to stop Freemasonry falling over or collapsing, what we cannot do is change things which actually have worked quite well for 100, 150 years and may be slightly inconvenient if we have to continue doing them in that particular way for 18 months or 2 years until such time as they could be changed with appropriate thought, with appropriate debate, ensuring the benefit of hindsight and retrospect. And I think that is very sensible, but there are obviously a number of issues which you will be aware of which come up, which vex people. So, for example, our rules do not allow a master to be installed at any date other than in the stated date of installation, with a few provisos of sort of 5 weeks, one side or the other. And so if a lodge misses its installation meeting and 5 weeks have elapsed, that means that the current master stays in place for a year. It's quite clear that this issue polarizes the Masonic community. There are those who strongly feel that the master has not done anything very much this year, and so therefore should be allowed to have his full year in office, because otherwise he won't get to do his circuit of installed masters, and he won't get to do the ceremonies that he would otherwise do, and therefore it is entirely right and proper that he stays on for a second year and does his job properly, as it were. Similarly, the other set of people think that senior warden or whoever is lined up to be master has now been denied his year in the chair and is going to have to wait a year, and that is beyond the pale. And of course, the reality is that each lodge will have a different view along that spectrum. And some people will be strongly in favour of doing one thing, and some people will be strongly in favour of doing the other. Unfortunately, at the moment, the rules are absolutely clear. If you miss your installation, the master stays in the chair for another year. And so I think if there was something that I would like to be able to introduce, sort of emergency legislation as it was, it would be to address that issue. It would be to allow lodges to decide for themselves what their individual circumstances were and what they would like to do in that particular situation. In order to introduce any sort of new changes to the Book of Constitutions to facilitate that, however, it would need to be given as a notice of motion at one meeting of quarterly communication and then voted on at the next. And so there is a 6-month lag time in order to do that. And there is nothing that we can do about that. That's simply how it is.
Obviously, that will bring lodges in line with how it is in chapter. With chapter, obviously, you can if the one of the principals isn't present, you simply install them at the next meeting. It's a lot more flexible in the Royal Arch, and I think certainly there's a lot of scribes out there who are breathing a sigh of relief with the as to having to be able to conduct elections and the installation at the same meeting, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's certainly, I think that will be welcome news. Perhaps some will say too little too late, but I think it is definitely would be welcome news going forward. Speaking of going forward, I'll come to a question which is a lot of people have asked over the past couple of weeks. Now, I suspect that you've rather used to answering the question about delivering value for money, and the one, I've stopped paying my gym membership for the period. Why should I continue paying my lodge fees, etc. UJLA have obviously announced that they're not going to be increasing the annual dues. I've been getting lots of questions in terms of, are they going to be offering some kind of discount on them? Would you like to talk about value and how that equation's come about?
Yes, I mean, the reality is that we are a membership organisation with high fixed overheads. We have a big, expensive headquarters in London, which, irrespective of COVID, requires its costs to continue to be paid. If you look at golf clubs, if you look at MCC, if you look at other membership clubs, none of them are actually saying because you can't actually do whatever it is that we do, that you don't have to pay. And that's because they're all in the same situation. Freemasonry in this country is by far the cheapest in Europe. I have talked on numerous occasions to my counterparts in the Grand Lodges across Europe, and UGLE membership is about half the price of the next nearest expensive Grand Lodge in Europe. Is that a sort of cold comfort for anybody who has just lost their job or whose families are under significant hardship and pressure as a result of furloughing at 80% or redundancy or the loss of income for those who are self-employed? No, it's not. But we do have to ensure that Freemasonry is around in the next 2, 3, 5, 10, 50, 100 years. It's certainly not the case that we are complacent, and our central costs have been slashed very significantly and very early on when we saw the writing on the wall and when we saw what was happening. And the Board of General Purposes has been extremely strident in deferring costs into 2023, 2024, cancelling capital projects, furloughing staff, making redundancies within the centre to ensure that the membership are getting value for the money that they're paying. But my staff are a highly skilled bunch. It's not the case that you can simply make them redundant and then when this is all over, go out to an agency and pick up 6 people who can do exactly the same thing. It takes years to grow the sorts of expertise that they have in the areas that they work in. And the fact that different sectors are able to do this, I don't think means that we should be either from a business sense point of view or indeed from a moral point of view. So what I would say is that we are in no means complacent or profligate with the membership fees that are coming in. But we do have high fixed overheads which need to be paid if Freemasonry is to survive. And I think not raising fees is the right way of addressing that.
We've had a question from David Randerson talking about your role in raising the profile of Freemasonry in the community and communicating with the wider world. Is it, to what extent will that go? I mean, the UGLE obviously have quite a significant profile on Twitter now and various other bits of social media. Do you anticipate that expanding into even going as far as, dare I say, advertising?
A number of provinces already are using targeted advertising on Facebook to reach particular demographics. And Buckinghamshire has done that, and that's why they've got a waiting list of 130 people willing to come in. I don't think we're ever going to get to a point where we're sort of advertising for members on the back of buses, but a lot of the advertising that we do is passive through description of our activities, and in particular our charitable activities. And as we have become more skilled at public relations, as we've been more skilled at placing stories within the national press and within the non sort of standard media, we are seeing increased web hits, we're seeing increased interest in membership, and certainly over the past 3 months or so, significantly increased interest in who we are and what we do. And so will we ever be using advertising agencies and adverts on ITV or billboards on the side of motorways? No. However, intelligent, targeted advertising towards particular demographics of men with particular interests and particular income streams and the sorts of things that you can drill down into using some of the tools available I think you are being used by provinces, and UGLE will, in the future, certainly have a role in national campaigns along those lines.
Sorry, just to jump back to value, the question came in whilst we were talking about it. But you talked about a modern membership organisation. Have you looked at different membership structures, perhaps an individual membership of UGLE, which would then allow you to join X number of lodges, for example, so you pay directly to UGLE as opposed to through the lodge? How is that process reviewed? And I suspect it has been considered and is considered quite often.
Yes, this is a question which again polarises Freemasons, and you're either usually in one camp or the other. There's very few people who sort of vacillate between the two. UGLE's view is that we would not expect people who are members of only one lodge to subsidise the membership of another Freemason who may be a member of 5 or 6 lodges. We think that if you are a member of 5 or 6 lodges, then you pay more because you get more than if you're a member of purely one lodge. There are arguments for that and there are arguments against that, but it has been looked at significantly and in depth in financial terms. And in order to go to a model where everybody simply pays one membership, in order to maintain income, the membership fee for everybody would have to rise by about £30 to £40. And our judgment is that simply would neither be fair nor would it be swallowed, and it would precipitate an exodus, which we don't want to do.
Thank you. We're just coming towards the end of the hour. You were a Deputy Grand Director of Ceremonies and then moved to Grand Secretary, which is something which will be unthinkable in this province. There's a lot of kind of informal rivalry between the Secretariat and the Directors of Ceremonies, and likewise the Wardens as well.
I think they decided I was no bloody good and had to move to the Secretariat.
Thanks. Given the choice, would you pick the ritual and the ceremonial over the administration and development?
Oh, that's a very naughty question, and one which requires a diplomatic answer. The trite answer is that I enjoy both. And the role I have at the moment, of course, is wonderful because it allows me to do both. But I've always been a problem solver. I went into medicine because, not because I was particularly a fluffy people person, but because I actually like working out what the problem was, what was wrong with people, and then how you might apply a solution to get them better. And one of my great joys is that I have swapped one type of problem for a job where I have a completely different set of problems in different fields, but the methodology that you apply in order to try to solve them is very similar. And there's a little bit of that wearing both hats, both in the GDC role or the Deputy GDC role in working out ceremonial issues, and indeed, of course, in the organisational role from the perspective of the Chief Executive. I think it's nice to have that balance. I very much enjoy getting out of Freemasons Hall, coming to the provinces, going to the districts in the ceremonial role. It allows me to meet people who I would ordinarily not come into contact with, and certainly as far as the districts are concerned, people who often live in very, very different circumstances to us in this country, and that's always an eye-opener. And it's good every now and then to have your eyes opened in that way. But fundamentally, I thoroughly enjoy problem solving, and I get a lot more of that from the secretarial side.
David Staples, thank you very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure to have you here, and thank you for answering some rather tricky questions frankly and openly as you have. Just to let everybody know that next week we're going to be having a presentation on Hermes, which is part of that developing the systems going forward. Just a final comment, David, on Project Hermes?
So Hermes will be with you certainly by the middle of next year, and hopefully sooner. The idea behind it is to make everybody's lives easier. And it's as simple as that, really. UGLE knows who each and every one of you are. It knows your dates of birth. It knows which lodges and chapters you're a member of. It knows whether you've paid or not paid your subscriptions. It knows all sorts of things. And yet, every time you want to do anything in Masonry, you have to fill out a form where you write down all of those details all over again, and you tell us all of the same stuff that we already know about you. And so the fundamental of Hermes is that you won't have to do that anymore. Your lodge secretaries won't have to do that anymore. Your provinces won't have to do that. And UGLE won't have to drown in the tons of paper that get sent to it from all the provinces and districts each year. We make annual returns much, much easier. We make clearance certificates a touch of a button. We make joining another unit a touch of a button. We make all of those things which make you roll your eyes and become bored and disengaged in terms of the administration go away, so that you can focus on doing the things that you actually enjoy doing instead. And a lot of the sort of worries that are going around about the level of technical knowledge required to do this, or the technical ability required to do this, are vastly exaggerated. If you have an email address, if you bank online, if you shop online, that's all you will need to be able to do in order to use the system. And if you find it difficult or challenging, then we will have got it significantly wrong. And because I chair the group that's actually implementing this, I'm putting an awful lot of time and effort into talking to pilot provinces, pilot districts, and indeed people at lodge secretary level to ensure that it is absolutely intuitive and it doesn't create work, it makes work disappear.
Thank you very much. I'm going to hang around for the next few minutes or so and answer any questions which may come up and the lodge secretaries and scribes want to ask me individually. But for now, David, thank you very much for joining us. Stay well, and I hope that we'll see you in West Lancashire soon.
West Lancashire, thank you very much indeed for having me. Take care.
Bye-bye now.